She wasn't the kind of woman anyone noticed when she walked into a room. That wasn't her fault. That was by design. Maren Voss, and she would correct anyone who tried to call her anything else. Last name included, full stop. Had spent 11 years making herself invisible. She wore dark colors. She kept her voice low in meetings. She arrived early and left late, and she never, under any circumstances, ate lunch anywhere that someone from the office might see her. Not because she was ashamed. She told herself that every morning in the mirror. Not because she was ashamed. It was simply easier this way. Easier to be the woman no one really looked at, the one who filed the reports and reconciled the accounts and kept the second set of books that no one outside this building was ever supposed to know existed. She was very good at her job. She was also very good at pretending the job didn't terrify her. The man she worked for was named Crispin Daub, and he was the kind of man cities whispered about, not loudly. Cities had learned, the hard way, usually, that it was safer to whisper. He ran legitimate real estate operations from the 32nd floor of a building he owned outright on the west side of Chicago, and he ran considerably less legitimate operations from a network of contacts and couriers, and carefully maintained relationships that stretched across 6 states and 2 international borders. Maren had never asked about any of that. She had accepted the job at Dower Property Holdings, the same way most accountants at her level accepted jobs. She had needed the money. She had been quietly desperate, in the way that only 31-year-olds with student loans and a mother in a care facility understand, and the salary had been 2.5 times what anyone else in the city was offering. She had told herself she would leave after a year. That had been 3 years ago. Now she sat at her desk on the 31st floor. Not 32. Never 32. She had been explicitly told during onboarding that she was not to take the elevator to 32 unless summoned. And she reviewed a wire transfer record that had 3 discrepancies in it, which was 3 more than anyone in this building tolerated. Maren worked in black-framed glasses she had worn since college, hair pulled back in a way that she privately admitted was less elegant updo. And more, I ran out of time this morning. She wore a charcoal blazer that fit her full chest and wide hips exactly right, which had taken her 4 returns and a firmly worded email to a customer service representative to finally achieve. Nobody here noticed the blazer. Nobody here really noticed her, except that lately something had shifted. She couldn't name it. She didn't want to name it. Crispin Daub was 43 years old and had never, in the 3 years she had worked for him, asked a personal question of any employee beneath his direct reports. He communicated in terse sentences. He did not make small talk. He had once, according to office legend, fired a man for laughing too loudly in the hallway outside his office. Maren had never confirmed this story, but she had never doubted it either, and yet, 3 weeks ago, he had appeared at her office door. Her office, not a conference room, not the hallway, and asked her, without preamble, whether she preferred the new reconciliation software to the previous system. She had been so startled she had dropped her pen. He had watched her pick it up with an expression she could not read, then said simply, "Good. Let me know if it causes problems," and walked away. 2 weeks ago, he had sent a car to drive her home when the building HVAC failed during a July heat wave, and the parking structure had reached a temperature that the facilities manager called inadvisable for extended exposure. She had not asked for this. His assistant, a man named Birch who existed primarily to deliver envelopes and look intimidating, had simply appeared at her desk and said, "Mr. Dar arranged transport." She had thought about it for 3 days. She had told herself it meant nothing. He was protecting an asset. She knew where the bodies were buried, figuratively speaking, possibly literally. She did not investigate that question, and last week, he had stopped at the break room while she was heating up leftovers. Mortifying, because the smell of whatever her mother's nurse had packed for her was doing something aggressive in the microwave, and he had stood in the doorway in a dark suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he had said, "I hope you're not working through lunch again." She had stared at him. He had held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds longer than was appropriate for a man speaking to his company's forensic accountant about her meal schedule, then turned and walked away. She had eaten the leftovers cold at her desk, wondering if she was losing her mind. That had been 7 days ago. Today was Saturday, which meant Maren was doing something she almost never did. She was not working. She was not at the care facility with her mother. She was sitting across a white linen table from a man named Elliot Grange, who was a tax attorney she had met at a professional conference in March, who had called her twice since then, who had brown eyes and an open smile and zero knowledge that the woman across from him spent most of her professional life as a knowing accessory to organized crime. She had borrowed a dress from her neighbor for the occasion. The dress was burgundy, draped beautifully across her shoulders and chest, and fit her like it had been tailored for exactly her body, which it had not been, but somehow managed to seem like it had. She had worn her hair down, which she did almost never on a weekday, and occasionally on weekends when she was feeling, as she put it to herself, dangerously optimistic. The restaurant was called Ardennes. It was the kind of place where the lighting was deliberately flattering, and the menu had no prices, which either meant you could afford it or you were about to be very embarrassed. Elliot had chosen it. She had told herself this was endearing rather than excessive. She was on her second glass of wine and feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like a person who existed outside of a spreadsheet. She did not notice the car that stopped at the curb outside. She did not see the door open. She did not see the man who stepped out and then went absolutely, completely still on the sidewalk, because he had looked through the glass window of Ardennes and seen something that had, by all observable evidence, struck him like a physical blow. Crispin Doer stood on the sidewalk in a suit, the color of charcoal and smoke, and he did not move. Inside, Maren laughed at something Elliot said. Real laughter, unguarded, her head tilting back slightly. Elliot said something else. She leaned forward, forearms resting on the white linen, and the candlelight did something to her face that Crispin had apparently never had the occasion to witness, because his jaw tightened in a way that his driver, watching from behind the wheel, had never seen in 6 years of employment. The driver said nothing. Crispin said nothing. He watched Maren rest her chin briefly on her hand in the way that people do when someone is saying something they find genuinely interesting, and something moved across his face that he would, later, in private, spend a considerable amount of time pretending had not. He had come to Ardennes to meet with a business associate. The associate was sitting at a table in the back section, waiting. Crispin knew this because he had confirmed it 40 minutes ago. He also knew, as he stood on the sidewalk on a Saturday night in July, watching his forensic accountant laugh in a burgundy dress, that he was not going to walk past her table. He was going to sit down at it. This was objectively insane. He walked inside anyway. The maitre d' saw him first. Everyone always saw him first. It was one of those involuntary, instinctive things. A room's awareness shifting when Crispin Dar entered it, the way animals in a field go still when something moves at the tree line. The man appeared at his elbow with a menu and a very careful smile. "Mr. Dar, your associate is—" "I'll find him," Crispin said, which was not an invitation for further direction. He moved through the restaurant. Maren was in the middle of the room, which, from her perspective, she had chosen because it was near the window and the light was nice. From where Crispin was now standing 3 tables away, it meant he had an entirely unobstructed view of her, reaching for her wine glass, which she held by the stem in the careful way of someone who had once been told that's what you were supposed to do and had never forgotten it. She was beautiful. He processed this the way he processed most information, without visible reaction filed immediately, consequences assessed. The consequences, in this case, were significant. He crossed the remaining distance in 8 steps and stopped at the edge of the table. Maren looked up. She went, for approximately 2 full seconds, completely blank. "Mr. Dar," she said. It came out steadier than it should have. She had a gift for that. "Maren." His eyes moved once, quickly to Elliot, then back to her. Elliot, to his credit, looked merely curious rather than alarmed. He didn't know what Crispin Dar looked like. He didn't know what the name meant. He existed outside the particular gravity of the world. Maren navigated 6 days a week. And in this moment, Maren found that both deeply enviable and slightly terrifying. "I didn't realize you came here," she said. She was gripping her wine glass by the stem. "I have a meeting." He glanced at the empty chair at their table, the one the waiter had pulled slightly away when he'd brought the bread basket, and then he pulled it out and sat down. Maren stared at him. Elliot said pleasantly, "Elliot Grange, we haven't met." Crispin looked at him with the particular quality of attention that Maren had observed him use on people he found either interesting or potentially problematic. "No," Crispin agreed. "We haven't. Are you a colleague of Maren's?" Elliot asked. A pause. "Something like that." Maren set down her wineglass before she shattered the stem. "Mr. Dewar is my employer," she said. Her voice was extremely even. She was extremely proud of her voice. "Ah." Elliot's expression remained open. "Well, I hope we're not keeping her too late. I know Saturdays can get complicated when—" "She doesn't work Saturdays," Crispin said. There was a particular quality to the way he said it. Not aggressive. Simply a statement of something he had apparently just decided was inviolable. "Right," Maren said. "I don't work Saturdays, which is why I'm here on a Saturday, not working." She was aware she was saying the word Saturday too many times. She stopped. Elliot smiled at her. He was being very gracious. She appreciated him enormously for it, while simultaneously wishing he would say something infuriating, so she could stop feeling guilty about the way this dinner was now going. Crispin asked for water from a passing server, without looking at the server to do it. He leaned back slightly in the chair, and Maren had the distinct, disorienting experience of watching the most powerful and dangerous man she had ever met sit at a small candlelit table for 2 and simply, "Stay there." "How did you 2 meet?" he asked. He was looking at Elliot. Elliot explained about the conference, the March conference, the hotel lobby bar, the conversation about tax code revisions that had lasted longer than either of them expected. He told the story well. He was a good storyteller. He had a warm quality that Maren had noticed at the conference and had found, in the intervening months, she thought about sometimes. Crispin listened to all of this with the same expression he wore when he was reading a document and finding it not entirely credible. "Tax law," he said, when Elliot finished. "Tax law," Elliot confirmed pleasantly. "Interesting field. It can be." Elliot glanced at Maren with a look that said gently, "This is a strange evening, and I will follow your lead," which Maren found made her want to apologize to him for things she couldn't name. "She's very good with numbers," Crispin said. He said it the way he might say the sky is blue. Simple observation, obvious fact. Not a compliment, exactly. More like testimony. She mentioned something similar about herself, actually. Elliot smiled at her again. "She's being modest. She usually is," Crispin said. Maren looked at him. He was looking at the table. Or rather, he appeared to be looking at the table, in the way that she had learned, over 3 years, was actually him looking at her from the periphery of his vision. She had learned this in her first year. She had filed it away in a part of her mind she did not open casually. The waiter appeared to ask about the dessert menu. Maren said, "No, thank you." Elliot said he was happy to share something if she wanted. Crispin said nothing, which was somehow the loudest thing happening at the table. After the waiter left, Elliot excused himself politely in the direction of the restroom, and for a moment there was nothing at the table except Maren and Crispin, and the sound of the restaurant moving around them. She looked at him directly. "Why are you sitting at my table?" she said. "Quiet. Precise." He met her eyes. "I saw you through the window." And something shifted in his expression. The edges of it. Something that wasn't quite what she expected from a man who had, in her experience, no edges worth worrying about, because there was nothing soft enough to be cut. "You looked different," he said. "I look exactly the same," she said. "No," he said. "You don't." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, at the window, at the street outside where his car was presumably still parked, and his driver was presumably still waiting, and his associate in the back of the restaurant was presumably growing impatient. "You have a meeting," she said. "I'll get to it. It's rude to keep people waiting. Most people don't tell me that." "I know." She looked back at him. "That's not a compliment." He almost smiled. It was barely anything. A fractional change in the corner of his mouth. But she had spent 3 years learning to read him in the same way you learned to read weather, out of self-preservation, and she recognized it. "Go to your meeting, Mr. Dower," she said. He stayed for another moment. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and looked at her one more time. "I'll have Birch confirm Monday's schedule with you," he said. "It's Saturday. I know what day it is." He walked away, and Maren sat at the table and very carefully did not watch him go. She looked at her wine glass. She looked at the candle. She looked at her hands. By the time Elliot came back from the restroom, and the evening continued, and the conversation resumed its easy course, she had composed herself entirely. She laughed at the right moments. She asked questions that showed she'd been listening. She was, by every external measure, exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. She did not think about Crispin Duer once for the rest of the evening. This was a lie, but she told it to herself with tremendous discipline. Monday arrived the way Mondays do when you've spent Sunday dreading them. Fast, and without mercy. Birch was at her door at 8:07 a.m., which was earlier than he had ever appeared, and he had the particular expression of someone carrying an envelope they've been instructed not to discuss. She accepted the envelope. She opened it after he left. It was Monday's schedule, as promised. Except Monday's schedule now had a note at the bottom, handwritten in the kind of handwriting that suggested a man who had learned to write as though everything he committed to paper might one day be evidence. My 1 p.m. cancelled. I'd like a full review of the Henderson account. My office. Bring lunch if you haven't eaten. She read it twice. She put it in her desk drawer. She took it back out. She read it again. He had never once in 3 years suggested she bring lunch to a meeting. She bought a sandwich from the place 2 blocks away that she liked and almost never allowed herself, because it was the expensive place. And she was still paying off her mother's previous facility, and she watched her budget with the same attention she gave auditable income streams. She bought one and then, standing at the counter with her wallet out, bought 2. She told herself this was professional. She told herself she was being efficient. She told herself a lot of things in the elevator up to 32. Crispin's office was what happened when someone with significant resources and absolutely no desire to impress anyone designed a workspace. Functional, dark, expensive in ways that required close attention to notice. Bookshelves on 2 walls. A desk that had probably been someone's dining table in 1890. A view of the lake from the east-facing window that cost more than most small businesses to access. He was on the phone when she arrived. He gestured to the chair in front of the desk without looking at her. She sat. She heard him finish the call. The voice on the other end was speaking in a language she was fairly sure was Russian, and she was absolutely sure she did not want to know more about that. She had a well-developed habit of not knowing more than she needed to. He put the phone down and looked at her, and she saw him register the fact that she had set 2 sandwiches on the corner of his desk. A pause. "There's a cafe on the 2nd floor," he said. "I know," she said. "I didn't go there." He said nothing. He reached forward and picked up one of the sandwiches. He turned it over once, examining it in the way he examined most things, with complete attention and no visible expression. "Henderson account," she said, opening her folder. "Where do you want to start the beginning?" he said. "The beginning is going to take a while." "I know." She started at the beginning. They were an hour in when he interrupted her mid-sentence to say, "You know you're the only person on this floor who argues with my analysis." She stopped. "I don't argue with your analysis. You just told me I was wrong about the Q3 reserve allocation. I told you the numbers didn't support the reserve allocation. That's accounting. That's not arguing." He looked at her steadily. "No one else does it." "I know," she said. "That should concern you more than it concerns me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why do you always look surprised when I listen?" The question was unexpected enough that she didn't have an answer ready, which almost never happened to her. She was a woman who prepared answers in advance. She prepared answers for questions she hadn't been asked yet because it was useful to be ready. She hadn't prepared for this one. "Because," she said carefully, "you don't always listen." "I listen to you," he said, simply. Like it was nothing. Like it was also somehow everything. She looked at the Henderson account file in her lap. She looked at the lake through the window. She looked at the man across the desk, who was watching her with the kind of patience she had never before associated with him. Patience that felt less like waiting, and more like having already decided. "The Saturday dinner," she said. "Yes," he said. "That wasn't a coincidence." He didn't answer immediately. This was one of the things she had learned about him. He didn't deny things he saw no advantage in denying. He also didn't confirm things he hadn't finished thinking through yet. "Birch told me you had a reservation," he said finally. "Birch," she said. "Birch told you. He keeps my calendar. He keeps your calendar. Not mine." A pause. "You're on a connected system." She closed the Henderson file. She set it on the desk. She looked at Crispin Dewar, who was leaning back slightly in his chair. Watching her with that expression she had spent 3 years trying to classify, and had finally, sometime in the last 72 hours, understood. "That's surveillance," she said. "That's scheduling coordination. Crispin." She had never called him by his first name before. She felt it leave her mouth and hit the air of the room and do something to the atmosphere. Something she couldn't quantify, but could absolutely measure. "What are you doing?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the lake was flat and grey and enormous, and the city moved around the building with total indifference to what was happening on the 32nd floor. "I'm not sure," he said. It was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. She had heard him deliver lies so smooth they made professionals flinch. She had heard him negotiate with men who had small armies. She had never heard him say, "I'm not sure," in the particular way he was saying it now, like the uncertainty was the truth, and the truth was the only available answer. She took a breath, slow, controlled. "I work for you," she said. "Yes." "That makes this complicated," he agreed. "I know. I was going to say inadvisable. Also accurate." She picked up the Henderson file again. She opened it to the page she'd left off. She had, in the past 3 years, become very skilled at returning to the work when the other available option was something she wasn't ready to navigate. "We have 45 minutes left in the hour," she said. "Q4 variance is on page 11. He looked at her for another moment. Then he picked up his copy of the file. "Page 11, he said. They went back to the numbers. But something had shifted in the room, in the air between them. In the particular arrangement of 2 people in a space who had both, without quite agreeing to it, acknowledged something they had both been pretending wasn't there. She did not think about Elliot Grange on the elevator down. She did not think about a lot of things she usually thought about. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, when the building was nearly empty, and Marin was finishing a reconciliation that should have taken the morning, but had stretched, through no fault of her own, into early evening, The phone on her desk rang with Crispin's internal extension. She answered. "Are you still there?" he said. "I'm finishing the Carver Trust variants. Leave it until tomorrow. It'll take me 15 more minutes. Then I'll wait." She paused. "Wait for what?" A brief silence, then. "I thought you might want to get dinner." She looked at the Carver Trust file. She looked at the office around her, dark except for her lamp, and the ambient glow from the city outside the window. She thought about the dress she was not wearing. She was wearing the charcoal blazer again, and her hair was pulled back, and she had a crease in her cheek from where she'd rested it against her hand during the afternoon. And she thought about the last time she'd had dinner with someone who knew who she actually was. Her mother, she thought. Her mother knew who she actually was. "I'm not exactly dressed for dinner," she said. "Neither am I," he said. "There's a place 2 streets over. They have good food and they don't look at you when you walk in." She recognized what he was describing. It was the kind of place he frequented not for the food, but for the privacy. She had seen such places on expense reports. "Crispin," she said. "Yes," he said. "This is still inadvisable." "Yes," he said again. "I know. And you want to do it anyway." He didn't answer immediately. Then, "I've wanted to do it for longer than I should probably admit." She sat for a moment with that sentence, with the weight of it, with everything it implied about the past year, the past months, the particular way certain Mondays had felt different from other Mondays, without her being able to say exactly why. 15 minutes, she said. "I'm finishing the variants. I'll be downstairs." She hung up. She looked at the Carver Trust file. She saved her work. She changed nothing about her appearance. Not the blazer, not the hair, not the glasses, not a single thing. Because she was not the kind of woman who made herself smaller or different for anyone, and she had worked very hard to become that woman, and she intended to keep being her. She stood up, turned off her lamp, and walked to the elevator. He was waiting in the lobby. Not standing near the door, not checking his phone, simply standing in the center of the space the way he occupied any room he entered, as if it had been designed with him in mind, which this lobby, she happened to know, actually had been. He looked up when the elevator opened. His eyes went to her face first, not her clothes, not her figure, her face, and then a small, private expression she didn't have a category for yet. The kind that comes from a person seeing something they've been waiting to see. "You didn't change," he said. "No," she said. "Good," he said. And he meant it. She could tell he meant it the way you can tell when someone means something that cost them something to say. They walked out into the Thursday evening side by side, and the city moved around them at its usual indifferent pace, and Maren kept her hands in the pockets of the charcoal blazer that fit exactly right. And she thought about how long she had spent trying to be invisible in rooms where people chose not to see her, and how strange it was, how thoroughly, unexpectedly strange, to walk beside a man for whom she was, apparently, the only thing in the room worth looking at. She didn't know what was coming. She had spent 3 years learning the particular dangers of this world, and she understood them with the clarity of someone who kept the books. She was not naive. She was not without fear. She was also, for the first time in a very long time, not interested in disappearing. She let the evening be what it was. The city kept moving, and Crispin Dorr, who had not said a gentle word to anyone in longer than he could remember, walked beside her through it and said nothing at all, because some things don't need to be said to be understood.